Do I believe humanity is trapped? I actually don't. I think humanity is being given a great opportunity for growth, and I hope we take it. I hear we will. The guides have said humanity is going to make it, and I'm trusting that. But they said, we actually came to a place as a species where we created the means for our self destruction under the guise of maintaining safety.
What's up, guys? Welcome back. I have one of my most favorite guests on the show, Paul Selig. I think you've almost had him, I think the equivalent of like, I don't know, 5 or 6 appearances now, I think, on this show. I think you're right behind me as far as number of times you've been on this show. So thank you for taking the time.
Happy to be here.
Um, so yeah, we've had an interesting conversation. I'm so fascinated with the idea that you're going to write a memoir, right? How would you get yourself into that creative process? Like set yourself up for that.
I had the worst writer's block of anybody I've ever known in my life when I was, writing plays years ago. And I don't know what it's going to be like now, truthfully, to do this. I've been avoiding it. I've got one more channel book that I have to do between now and the end of September. And that'll probably be done over the summer because those take about 2 months of sittings. And then I've got a year to tell my story. And I don't know what that's going to be like at all. I'm hoping it's easier than it used to be. But, right now, one of the books that come out, that have my name on them, I'm sitting in a chair and I'm taking dictation. I mean, that's really how those things happen. There's no preparation and there's no rewriting. There's really just copy editing, no editing, but just correcting the typos and punctuation errors. That's really the most that happens with those books.
Sure. So it's like more a passive approach, right? Like allowing the channel to come through you.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then I guess to get back into that process, there's going to be some knocking off the cobwebs. I feel like that's true for me though, right? Like I do a lot of academic research and then for school and then like when I take breaks, summer breaks and start back, in fall, spring semester, it seems like it's a little tough to get started. So I can only imagine, right? Like I don't know how long it's been since you've started, that writing process for yourself, but
It's been a while. I mean, other than writing the introductions to a couple of the books, the channel books that have come out, I haven't done my own writing since probably the first book, right before the first book came out, which was 2010. So I had been a writer when I was a kid, when I was in college and graduate school and thereafter, and I taught writing for many years. But again, I had the worst writer's block of anybody I've ever known in my life. And when the channel stuff started coming, I mean, when they started lecturing and I was encouraged to transcribe the teachings, the recordings, and I found that they were, perfect lectures that didn't require any editing, I was just so thrilled because I was so used to struggle and there was really no struggle with the channeled work. So I'm hoping that some of that is present when I work again, and that the guides that have been working with me will support me in this process. But the big key, I think, is sort of staying out of the way with channeling, and I'm hoping that that's the case
Mhm.
with writing a memoir.
Mm. How are you nervous at all about that, right? Like,
Yeah, probably because I'm avoiding it. So I think I'm a little nervous about it. But I'm thinking about it, and I'm sure that the publisher would like, a happy self-help memoir. It's not going to be that. It's going to be, it was a bit of a shit show. So, I mean, I don't know what's going to come out, once I start telling the story for real, but none of this was expected. And a lot of it came with tremendous challenge. And that's the story I have to tell. And maybe that'll be of some help to somebody else. And I think I'll benefit from talking about how this began and what it's been like, and how things can change, because it's really been a journey for me of great change.
Hmm. So talk about that change, right? From where you started, and not just not necessarily with the channeling, right? But with like Paul Selig, you know,
Yeah.
the person. What does that change look like?
I'm not sure how to describe this. I think it depends on what day you catch me and how I'm reflecting on being in the world, because that informs how I think about it. But I was a sad kid, really, and a very worried kid, and a gay kid, and, a kid in a strange, strange home, probably not a lot stranger than other people's, but it was pretty strange. And my passage from atheism, really, which is kind of how I was raised, to what it is now, and I can't even say what it is because I'm not religious, but to an awareness of spirit and the presence of spirit, is radical, and all of my life is different than it was. I'm still worried. I'm better than I was by a lot. I'm much, much less frightened than I used to be in the world.
Hmm.
And for the most part, I'm actually much of the time much happier than I thought I could be. And I think that's the key. I don't know that I knew that I could be. I thought it was going to be hard all the time. And, I did a channeling yesterday, and somebody was asking about their difficult path. And I piped and said, well, my path has been really difficult. And then I said something to the effect of, I think that that's how growth comes. And I did my little spiel on my, which in retrospect was my affirming the challenge of my path. And then my guides piped in and they said, well, yeah, that's been the case for you, but you also make it hard, and you have an investment in it being hard, and you believe that that's the gain. And they said pretty much, there are other ways to learn. You can learn through laughter. You can learn through joy. It doesn't all have to be struggle.
Hmm.
But I came into this. I live on Maui now, where there's a lot of woo woo here on Maui, and my spiritual life really came out of sheer necessity, and at a time of tremendous, tremendous pain. And then there was something there that I never thought could be there or would be there. I mean, really, it was sort of one of these odd conversion stories. And I'm glad that it happened for me that way. But I think when you get some sense of spirituality in the trenches, it colors and informs your experience of it. I didn't get it with rainbows and unicorns. It's not how it came to me. And
Hmm.
for some people, perhaps it is, and I'm not going to knock it. It sounds pleasant.
Sure. Yeah. Well, being a channel and receiving these teachings, it sounds like it's very passive when it comes through you and you channel it and then you produce a book. Where does Paul Selig sit as far as, do you believe what you're channeling? Do you buy into that?
Well, it's an interesting question. There's a quote from the woman who channeled A Course in Miracles, which I'm not a student of, but I heard this quote early on, and I totally bought it. And what she said was, if memory serves me, I don't believe it, but I know it's true.
Hmm.
And that's like, yep. When it's coming out of my mouth and all of this stuff, and it's a mystical teaching about embodiment as the true self, or the divine self, or the Christ itself, whatever they want to call it, when it's coming, I can't refute it. I'm going, yep, 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 this is true. And do I walk around going, aha, look at me, I'm the great I am? I don't. I still experience my humanity in fullness. But what I don't do anymore, I think, is deny the divinity in myself and others in the way that I think I was led to believe was the only way to be in the world. So do I believe it? Yeah. Am I challenged by it? 85% of the time. But in some ways, I have this odd experience of being kind of a radio for this. And so when I'm channeling, I'm not saying, tell me what I want to hear, or affirm my beliefs, or tell me what other people want to hear because I'll have more interest. I can't do that. I sit in the chair, I hear one phrase repeated incessantly, and I speak that phrase, and then kaboom, everything else just tumbles out and keeps tumbling out until they're done. And my job, which I think I'm good at this point, is to maintain the focus to receive the dictation, which means if it's not what I want to hear, I can interrupt it and say, what do you mean by this? Which I've been known to do. But it's not the teaching that's convenient for me. It's not the teaching that tells me how to get more of what I think I want, because the guides say much of what I think I want is indoctrinated through cultural agreement, what one is told to aspire to, how one should be, and I bought into all that stuff. And I don't in the ways that I think I once did. But the teaching is a very different teaching. It's about realization, which is knowing, and knowing who you are at the cost of what the personality self would decide should be. Nothing wrong with the personality self, but the guides say the personality self knows itself through history, through what it's experienced and what it's been taught. It doesn't realize or know who it is beyond the mask. It's confused itself. It's confused the mask for the person. That's all. And the mask has a place. It's just not who I am and who you are either. That's how I understand it.
Sure. I'm trying to remember, do they give like practicalities of like how we can, have that transcendence along with the anxieties and the defenses that we have as human beings?
Well, I mean, do they coexist? I assume they do. I mean, I don't, I don't consider myself enlightened. I tend to be a little watchful of people who walk around announcing that they are, because I think if you are, you probably don't need to announce it. You're just going about your business being. And finally, it's a teaching of being. I understand now, though, and I do understand this, and I really do get this, that it's all opportunity. It's all growth. Like it or not, I mean, most of the growth that I've experienced in my life hasn't been because it's something that I would want to choose. The circumstances that led to the growth were often deeply destabilizing to my idea of who I should be or how the world should work. So I get that now. So it's changed my frame of reference. But I also think, the guides say this again and again and again. You can't be the light and hold another in darkness, or who you put in darkness or what you put in darkness calls you to the darkness. I totally get it, and I still do it, and I pay the price for that. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that I'm not in source? I have to be in source always, regardless of whether I think I am or not, because that's the true reality. My experience of myself in the world can change. And it's much easier to have a spiritual life, I suspect, on the days when everything is going exactly as you think it should, and the days when it's not, perhaps, are the days we're really growing, and learning and discovering how we contribute to the messes or the challenges, the chaos. But can you have them both? Yes, I believe you have to. Sure. I mean, the guides say, everything is of God, but things are operating in a scale of vibration or gradation or sound, low and high, but all things are in that spectrum. And when one realizes all things as of source, one can begin to transpose the tone, the vibration, the octave into a higher experience, and that includes who we are.
It sounds so beautiful, right? What does Paul Selig do though when he feels triggered? Like when he just feels agitated, high anxiety? Like, is it feeling that? Is it stepping into that and feeling it and releasing it, having that cathartic experience? Or is it conscious raising where you kind of step back and have emotional intelligence and say, all right, this is what my body's experiencing? How do you release that trauma? Do they ever talk about that?
Yeah, they talk about it a lot. The book that's coming out next is very much about that. They call it the Book of Innocence. And what's interesting about that book, I mean, I'll try to address my own experience with it. And these are new teachings, so I'm not versed in them yet in terms of how to explain them. Once I sit down and I do the audiobook and I really read the text aloud, it's easier for me. But they talked about memory a lot in the Book of Innocence, and that all memory that we hold has been informed through the lens of a belief that we're separate from source. Because that's how this field has operated. That's how this world has, claimed itself. And consequently, those memories are informed by a misperception. And so what they're beginning to do in this book is reclaim memory, which doesn't mean you pretend that something didn't happen. That's not what they're saying at all. But you are re-seeing things beyond the lens of separation, which is fear. Fear and separation work in tandem. So how do I do it when I'm triggered? I get triggered. I usually get on the phone and call my buddy who's a good psychic, and we trade all the time, And I do that because it's hard for me to read for myself. And I think it's hard for a lot of people too. So I do some of that. But I also have context now, and some of this is just age. I'm 61 now, and I've lived through some crap, and big stuff, and everybody does. And so I'm less convinced that what I thought would kill me is going to kill me. You know what I mean? When it happens, that's also some of it's just hindsight. But is there a trick? Yeah, the trick is knowing who you are anyway, in spite of the appearance, knowing truth anyway beyond circumstance, which is transitory, So, I mean, it's a big conversation, but I get triggered? Absolutely, I do. Ask any of my friends.
Yeah, I mean, to read for yourself, that'd be interesting. I feel like you have a lot of biases there, right? Like there's a lot of blind spots. I have blind spots. I don't see something until I get triggered and then it comes out of my body and it's like, holy crap. Like, especially with young kids. It's almost like a mirror almost. Like I can see things that trigger me from them that is just a part of me, right? I see it in my everyday life. Like I just got done reading Yogananda's book, and it's interesting because it's such an eye opener for me. I was under the impression that I needed a teacher, and through meditation and through just inward guidance, I received you have all the teachers that you need. Look at everything that triggers you. You know what I mean? Like that's
Exactly right.
it's a mirror. It's like the things that trigger you. Like I can't and sometimes you're just blind to it. Certain people push my buttons and it triggers me, you know, I can't see it, but I know it's there. But I feel like you gotta, you just kind of got to integrate. You got to integrate with the shadow, which that's tough because nobody wants to look at the shadow. And, a lot of people, I feel like a lot of people don't even know what their shadow looks like. I mean, for me, it's probably all of the traumas. It's all of the things that I don't want to look at, the parts of me that I'm ashamed of, the parts of me that that I imagine to be so ugly. And, but it's not running away from that. It's taking it piece by piece. I think that's where the healing comes from, is having that courage to go inward and integrate with that and see yourself for what it really is, and be accepting of that regardless of what's there, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. I mean, the guides have said for a long, long time, if you have a body buried in the basement, it's going to stink up the whole house. And that's inclusive of those parts of ourselves that we wish to put in shadow. When they say who you put in darkness, what you put in darkness calls you to the darkness, they're also speaking to those parts of ourselves that we don't want to look at or address or feel shame around. But my understanding, and I could be wrong, is part of what they teach is how to bring light to these parts of ourselves. It's not spiritual bypassing. It's not pretending it didn't happen or that it was never there. You don't feel rage or shame. It's reclaiming things in source. The very first book, which was called I Am the Word, which was dictated in 2009, they would say, I am word through my body, word, I am word through my vibration. There was this attunement to the energy of the word. And, and people utilize that often to call, like say the word is the energy of the creator in action. So when you're calling forth that energy, you're calling the energy of the creator in action to these places that have been denied the light, so that they can be changed. The guides say that we're operating in an octave of tone and vibration, this reality and all this stuff, high, low, and in between. It's all source. It's just operating at different levels of tone. And their teaching in a lot of ways is about transposition, or bring what has been held in the lower field to the higher so that can be re-seen or re-known. And I think that that's got to be true about those parts of ourselves as well. At least that's my process. But I don't know that we get a free pass on this. I don't know, I'm not a very good new ager. Somebody waves a crystal wand over my head and says, you're done. I'm going to go, oh yeah. The work that comes through the guides was palpable for me physically. It was very, you can feel the energy, which was a huge thing. And for years, I was doing the work with them because I liked being in the energy, not because I thought it would be a teaching, which in fact it is. And they were preparing for that in all those early years. I know that now. But, I don't think that any of this I don't think this occurs until we have the encounter with it. I don't think that the purpose of our life is to pick at our scabs from our old wounds and, look at the old pain all day long. I don't think it's that either. I think it's the acknowledgement of the denial of the divine. That's what the guides say now. They say that the only real problem that we have collectively and individually as well is what they call the denial of the divine, where we say God cannot be. And God cannot be in this part of myself or in this feeling that I hide from or in this rage that's so consuming, And when those things are brought to the light or offered in the light, they can be transformed. I'm not trying to fix them. You're just letting them be of source, which they have to be anyway. If that makes any sense.
Sure. Yeah, no, it definitely does. Do they ever talk about like what happens if we reach that ideal life of like, fully knowing and living that life? Do they ever say like, will we stop reincarnating here? Do we go on to a different level? Do they ever speak to that?
Yesterday in this class that they were teaching online, they sort of said the next book is about what it's like to be at that level of consciousness. And I think that makes some sense to me, given where they've been bringing, their readers and students. I'm going to say yes and no. They talk about the upper room as a state of consciousness or vibration. And they say in the upper room, fear is an operative. If you want to have fear, you have to go back down to the lower field. It's present there, and you want to learn through that, you can, but there are different ways you can learn. So they say when we stop choosing in fear and we stop aligning to fear as a prerequisite for how we choose, and much of what I do and choose is still that way, whatever it might be. When we stop operating that way, we begin to have another experience of being. They talk about it in terms of presence and being, how we be in the world. And the world, they say, begins to reflect that altered consciousness, because you're operating at a level of tone or vibrational accord where they say you become the doorway for that. In some ways, it's like imagine you're playing a sound, your energetic field in your body, or in a level of vibrational tone where the echo, and they call it the echo of that tone, lifts what it encounters to itself through co-resonance. That's how the world is made new, they say, because they say God sees God in all of its creations. And so when you begin to align at that level of consciousness, you're not precluding source, you're not denying source, and consequently, you're reclaiming what is already true. The guides have said 1,000 times, you can't make anything holy. It already is, but you can deny the divine in anything you want to, and then that'll be your experience of it.
Sure. I agree with that 100%. I've recently come across a couple of people who have been speaking to the idea that we are like stuck here or like captives in this realm or in this reality where because of, I don't know if it's reincarnation, but like we don't know how powerful we are, so we're just stuck here, and that we just keep coming here because we don't realize we are. Um and I'm like, you know what, if that's your belief, then that's probably your reality. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? If you believe those things to be true, like if you believe there's a source outside of yourself that is literally keeping you here and like feeding off your emotions and energy and like this is an emotional farm almost, then that's going to be your reality. Like I just feel like belief and intention have so much to do with our realities.
I agree with you. I think there are different levels of consciousness that people can align to, and it's almost too big a discussion to get into. How do I want to say this? The guide said in an early book of mastery, they said you can't be a victim and a master at the same time. It doesn't work. And that doesn't mean that people aren't victimized and people don't do awful things. And I believe that there are parasitic energies and stuff that we can align to and that are not necessarily beneficial. But every time I've been in a workshop and somebody's raised their hand and said, I want this to be my last lifetime, the guides have said, well, then you get to come back. Then you get to come back because this is opportunity. It's opportunity to learn. It's opportunity. And I do get that. I do believe that. And, but I feel trapped in this level of consciousness? I suppose I could. There are plenty of areas in my life where I felt stuck. Do I believe humanity is trapped? I actually don't. I think humanity is being given a great opportunity for growth, and I hope we take it. I hear we will. The guides have said humanity is going to make it, and I'm trusting that. But they said, we actually came to a place as a species where we created the means for our self-destruction under the guise of maintaining safety, which they think is the most ridiculous thing in the world. Like you just keep building bigger bombs in the belief that they're not going to go off. They said eventually they will go off. That's what bombs are for, and that's what they do. They're not to keep the peace. So they have said until we come to a level of consciousness or agreement that is beyond the need for war, we're going to keep maintaining it because it's all we've known in memory. There's been war since we remember. So we expect it and we replicate it. And the guides say the small self replicates what it knows. And the action of fear, they say, is to claim more fear. And every choice we make in fear, they say, gets us more of the same. This is true individually and collectively. So what they say happens is humanity moves to a level of consciousness where the idea, you'd have to move beyond a level of vibrational accord or agreement that war is a solution. That's how I understand it. Does that mean? I assume that would also mean that there must be a level of consciousness where you don't need to plunder, or you don't need the greed that creates much war isn't operative. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Because all of those things they say it's the denial of the divine. Greed is the denial of the divine. It's a belief that there's not enough. And then we have that, we create from that, and then that's the reality we know. And if we're trapped in that reality, I would suggest it's our own creation. We're the guides say this, and it's a really important teaching. People say, I want to manifest this, I want to manifest that, I want to manifest a better relationship. you're everything, the guides say everything that you see and experience, you are in vibrational accord with. You're in co-resonance with everything. You see, because that's the level of consciousness that you hold individually and collectively. It doesn't mean that I created the war in the Middle East, but it does mean that my consciousness holds it and consequently is contributing to it, because thought is creative and I'm affirming it at whatever level of agreement I wish to come to. So when they talk about moving beyond things, they're talking about moving to another level of accord where things can transform. But that is how powerful we are, according to the guides. It's not that we're not powerful. In fact, we are, and we've actually, I hear, denied our own power. And granted, there have probably been institutions that shepherded that denial in. You know, if you have a culture that requires a priest to forgive you, then you have a power dynamic that requires somebody else to save you. The guides speak about the monad or the divine self, or they call it the Christ sometimes, but their definition of Christ is really simple. They say it's the aspect of the creator that can be realized in form. It's the seed of the divine that seeks to express itself as and through the source of all things. You know, it's known, they say it's known by different names in different cultures, but it's still source. And that's what changes things. I don't think it's wishful thinking. I think you align at that level and things begin to change because your choices begin to change as well.
Do you think you have that potential to be the realized Christ in this life?
I have no idea. I know what the guides teach, and they say we all do. That's the teaching. That's always been the teaching, you know. But it comes at a cost, and it comes at the cost of the old, or an old way of self-identifying. They've said in their books that, you know, those who are here now are doing the preparatory work for what's to come. You know, they've said in time, and people were not happy when the guide said this, it's going to take 4 generations to realize this as manifest at some level. They didn't get into it much, and I was actually riding in a car with a couple of people who didn't really know my work, and they said, well, what do your guides say about, is the world going to end? And the guide said, no, but it's going to take 4 generations. And they said, you know, that's really interesting, because when Moses led the Jews out of, you know, captivity, it was 40 years, 4 generations. But they said, which I didn't know, that it would take 40 years for them to forget that they had been slaves, 4 generations to forget slavery. And when I think about what the guides are teaching, which is now in the Book of Innocence, which is the idea of reclaiming memory in a higher octave. So we're not perpetuating the old without even intending to. I can understand, I think, what they're beginning to talk about a bit more. Do I think I'm going to realize this? I'm happy to be in this life now as I am, and growing as I am, and having these experiences that I have, that I often take for granted now, even though they're a bit extraordinary. But do I think I'm ascended? No. Or perfect? No. You know, I'm still Paul, you know, but there's a part of me, and I will say this, just as there's a part of you and a part of everyone that is ascended, and that's the true self. And that's what the guides say. When they bring people to the upper room, they're not inventing some imaginary place. They're saying there's an aspect of you that lives and experiences itself there. And you're bringing the rest of you that's been held in the lower field up to be reclaimed at that level of tone or vibration. And, you know, it's really interesting, you know, when people come to workshops, you know, and the guides are teaching and they're working in partner with partners, people are seeing the person before them, you know, just disappear, become energy. I mean, there are levels of consciousness that are available to us that we don't even know are there because we've been told we can't have them, you know.
So people have seen people disappear because of the energy?
No, they're seeing it. They're staring at somebody. They're working with somebody with the energy, and I mean, it's very common for people to see the faces alter, you know, and change, and you know. But then people also see the whole face just become energy. It loses, it's not disappear like they're not in the room, it's just energy. Everything is being reduced to source, which is what it already is.
Mhm.
You're not seeing what's not there. You're also seeing what is there at another level of vibration. That's how I understand it. But the eyes that are perceiving at that level, the consciousness that's perceiving is perceiving from a different perspective. You see, if I look at you right now, I'm going to say, well, he's a nice looking guy and he's such and such an age and this is the color of his hair and he's wearing headphones and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to make a lot of decisions about who you are or who I think you should be based upon those things. But who you are and who everybody is expresses at levels far beyond that. And that's what we're being invited to know.
Mm.
The guides say the true self knows and the small self, which is the personality self, thinks. There's nothing wrong with thinking, but they say knowing is realization. And you can't realize the inherent divine in oneself without realizing it in another. That's the paradox. It's not I'm the great I am on the mountain and you're not. The ones who know they are, I believe, know everybody else is as well. And that's the amazing gift and also the great challenge of that teaching, as I understand it.
Sure. I mean, there is a great sacrifice in that, I do believe. I feel like in order to become that, like the small self has to die almost. I feel like, right? Like the ego has to die with that because it's a totally different level of consciousness. Um,
I agree with you and I don't. Because I only know because the guides have talked about it a little bit. And they don't talk about the ego dying. They talk about the ego being appropriated to its rightful place. So the very first thing, I'm not the very first thing, but when I was maybe 30-ish, 31, 32, no more than 33. And I always say I'm 90% sure that I heard this in channel because I wrote it on a piece of paper because I didn't understand it. And I was struggling and I heard freedom will come or freedom comes when the throne relinquishes its king. And I thought, what does that mean? It means who sits in the throne? Who's running the show? If it's the personality self, everything's the way it's supposed to be in my world, so I can run everything the way I think it should be run. When it's the divine self or the true self or the God within, it's a different king. And the king runs a different kingdom. The guides talk about the kingdom as the realization of omnipresence of the divine in and as all manifestation. It's a I'm not there yet. But that's what they talk about. It's a mystical teaching, I suspect. So I understand that the ego structure and the personality structure is appropriated. You may always like your coffee black. I may always prefer, water to soda. I mean, that's just how I'm set up. It's not a bad thing to have our unique expressions. I don't get that. But I think the challenge is that we mistake ourselves for those expressions and we create value from them. I'm only as lovable as I appear. I'm only as good as my bank account. All that crap that we've been taught to believe. And I think, one of the challenges is that a lot of spiritual teachings seem to be about getting something or even getting to some level of consciousness as if that's the benefit. And I think that operating at different levels is the result of alignment. I don't think it's the prize. I think if it's the prize, we're going to be chasing things forever, but I think it comes as we can hold it.
Sure.
The guides have said, you can't drag somebody into too bright a room too quickly. They'll run from the light. Or they'll go kind of crazy or blind. So they bring people at the level that they can hold it. And that's my experience much of the time.
Sure. No, I love that. I've been researching like conditions of worth and how we've grown up as children to satisfy our parents' desires or their expectations of us, and they've created these conditions for us, and we go out into the world and we get in adulthood, and we start um, you know forming these attachments to entities outside of us, whether it be spouses or bosses, managers, whatever, relationships, and we do the same thing with them, living in a total illusion, right? Like living in this dream. And it's not until you start having like these little moments of conscious rising of wakefulness where you can see, um, your patterns. You can see what you're doing and why you're doing it. For me, it's been small. It's been like little small awakenings of like, oh, I can see why I'm doing that.
Yeah.
I can see kind of what's going on there. Like, why am success? Why do I have this idea of success? Why do I have this meaning attached to it? It's because, well, growing up, you had to be a hard worker. You had to do
Yeah.
these certain things. You had to sacrifice. You had to, put in a lot of work and a lot of time and sacrifice time with family members and love just and do this one thing, and then you'll be successful when you reach X, which is, to me, I'm finding it to be a total lie, a total illusion. And the question that keeps popping up is like, if that's the lie, how do we, like, what is our true nature, right? Like, if everything, all our programs from childhood, right, is or illusion, how do we reestablish with that true self? Like, what does that even look like? Is it just living in the moment, not worrying about the past, not thinking about the future? Is it just staying here with our breath and just like feeling and being? But again, we're at this paradox of like, it's so hard being a human being and staying in the moment and really just exploring things popping up in your existence and your reality and not having a reaction to it where it pushes you in the future, fear the future, and then attach to the past and of all your trauma. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. I mean, the guides teach this. They talk about presence and being again and again, presence and being. And from that place, you act. From that place, you can do, because you're not acting out of presumption of how things are supposed to be based on yesterday's history. But when you were talking, because you're such a sincere seeker. Every time I talk with you, I'm really reminded of that. There's real sincerity here, which I find very moving
Hmm.
when we talk. It's real. You're not looking to escape something. You're seeking to know, and I want to say almost be delivered from an illusion. That's the sense, which I understand. So when you were talking about what do you do about the future, I mean, the guys have said this a lot. If you live in a cold climate, it's wise to chop the firewood for the winter. That's prudence. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being aware of your requirements for being. I think that we've confused things a bit. My path started when I was 25, and I had achieved this list of things I thought I needed in the world to make me happy. And it was a fancy list. I wanted an Ivy League education. I wanted to be in this magazine. I wanted to be a published whatever. I got the whole list. I was a train wreck. And I was penniless too, in retrospect. When I look back on those early years, I'm amazed that I survived some of that stuff. But what it was a kind of a weird trap door that I fell through into another possibility that I would not have chosen had things been going so great. Why would I? So I don't know, I don't know what the answer is here. Do I think they coexist? Yeah, I think that is the paradox. I mean, it's being in the world, but not of it.
Hmm.
I think that's an easy way to understand it. I don't think that it's about escapism. I don't think it's about exploring the higher realms without integrating that experience. It's another way to get out of life. But the questions you're asking, it's really what you're like on target with what they're teaching now. This whole idea that we're replicating history without even knowing that we're doing it. We're pretty unconscious about it, but it's what we've been trained in. And what they're talking about is they're calling it the resurrection of the divine self, the monad as expressed. But they talk about the monad as innocence, which means basically without fear or without the idea of sin, that part of everybody that is liberated and also knows. and doesn't know through replication, but knows through gnosis, inherent knowing, divine knowing, which they say that's what transforms the world and that's what leads us. I hope it's true. I
Hmm.
actually believe it to be. Do I think this is a new idea? I really don't. I think this stuff has been around forever in different forms. I just don't read the books that you read. I buy them and they stay on the bookcase, you know.
Hmm.
I keep saying, I got to read this book. Everybody says, you got to read this book. Somebody sent me a link today because I've never read physics. I never read the new physics. But a student of the work who's also a friend sent me a link on string, some guy explaining string theory as musical tone. And I went, well, that's exactly what the guides teach. It's exactly what they teach, that everything is in tone, everything is music. And anything that is being sung at one level of vibration can be transposed to vibrate at a higher, which is how what they talk about the idea of ascension being. Ascension not being their word, but the word that gets thrown around a lot. And I went, well, that's it. You know, it's like any song can be sung in a higher octave. And if your tone and music, you can also express. But that doesn't happen when we're sort of mooring ourselves unintentionally to the old because
Hmm.
we think that's the only way we're allowed to be. You know, that's the big lie, is
Sure.
that we deserve the good stuff.
Sure. And again, it's most of that is conditioning, right? For sure. It's funny that you bring this up because I don't have any idea about quantum mechanics or physics,
Yeah.
but Gaia has like this program on channeling and how quantum mechanics or entanglement is like very appropriate when it comes to channeling because since we're all entangled, it's not like you're, we use the metaphors of a radio, but in actuality, because everything is entangled with everything at the quantum level, that we're all just kind of interacting with one another. And finding that entangle, having the intention to connect, and we're because of that intention, because of consciousness and all like I'm the wrong person to try to explain this, but it's so interesting how, to your point of string theory, tones and alignment and all of that, quantum mechanic jargon aligns with like it goes back to your point of like oneness, right? Like, and I hate to say it like that. I just, because it is very new agey, right? And it does feel good and saying that we're all connected. But again, I've heard it so many times. But when you break it down like scientifically and you start looking at quantum mechanics and things of that, theories like that, I mean, it's supporting that data. It's supporting that idea that everything is one.
Yeah. I mean, you've read the books I haven't, or watched the show I haven't. You know, I know though, you know, when I read for people, channeling is, you know, I'm the radio for that. When I read, like if I was to read you or your spouse or your boss or who anybody in your life, I step into them and I basically become them, and then I hear, and I'm pretty accurate, I'm told. And I used to think that I was traveling through, you know, traveling through space into some guy in Saigon and hearing him. And it was actually a physicist who said, you know, you're not traveling, you're going in. It's all there, it's all immediate, it's all immediate, you know, and it is. And I think that that's one level of agreement. The person, I'm often hearing the personality structure, the emotional self, but there are other layers and other levels that you can align to, which is union. Finally, it's union.
Hmm.
Finally, all of the ideas of separation. I mean, I think it's probably like one of those Russian dolls, you know. I mean, finally at the center, there's this one thing, you know, this one thing that's all things. And that's where, you know, we're going to. That's the monad or the divine self, whatever you want to call it. The divine self not being unique to you or to me, but the universal self, the God within.
Sure. I love that. Well, you talk about you haven't read that much. Like, what's the last thing you read?
The last thing I read, the last book I read
Hmm.
was about a was actually about a serial killer that bumped off somebody that I used to know when I was in the bars in New York City when I was in college, that had always haunted me. And somebody wrote a book about that. It was really sad to read that. He was a nice person
Really?
who, yeah, 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 yeah. I was a singing waiter in a piano bar when I was in college. And there was a bar down the block that we used to go to because they were open 20 minutes later than the one that I worked in. And there was a guy that used to close the bars singing, "I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar." This nice guy, "I'll be singing you in all the old familiar places," while this woman used to play the piano, and that would be the end of the night. And I stopped drinking after graduate school, and I was back in New York, and on my block, I saw a flyer posted that that man had been terribly murdered. It was an awful case, and the police weren't doing anything. And I always thought about it, that that person who I had liked was harmed that way. And then somebody wrote a book about, it turned out he was the victim of a serial killer. So it was a larger, yeah. That was the last book I read. But it was funny because it's not a time in my life that I spent a lot of time thinking about. I'm so far removed. I stopped drinking maybe 35 years ago now. Maybe it's almost 36, I was 25. So whatever that, 36 years it'll be. And so it's a time in my life that's really interesting to me. And that was a sad loss. He was a kind man, as I recall, who liked to sing. And that's my memory of him. And he wasn't a very good singer, but he liked to do it. That's all.
I'm not very good at singing either. Mixed two of us. But going to that story, like, do you feel like that he was attuned to that fate, or was that just like his destiny?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there are people that say we always are in some kind of agreement to the circumstances of passing. I don't know. I think people do awful things, and people that are sick and informed by fear are doing hard things that are painful to other people. Do I think we're all here to learn and this is part of it? I kind of believe so. And it's hard for me. My father was a Holocaust survivor, as a German Jew. He
I
got
didn't know
out.
that.
Oh yeah, well, he wasn't in the camps. His father was in Dachau and got out before they were extermination camps. Long family, weird story. But my father was in the kinder transport, and which was when they got the children out, some of the children out. Anyway, so I have all these big questions about fate and evil and those things that I'm not answering yet. But I have to believe at a certain level, from what the guides teach, that we're all in vibrational accord. Now, some people say, you create everything. People say, why did I create my cancer? And I don't go there with that, because I say, if you're living in a town where they're poisoning the water and the kids are getting sick because the plant is poisoning the water, did your child create the cancer? No, but you are in accord to living in a world where such things are tolerated. That's something we're also in agreement to. We're in agreement to genocide. We're in agreement that these things can happen. And then we forget our accountability to one another. The guides say, you don't kill what you know to be holy. You don't do it. It's an act of fear. So,
And I struggle with that too, because like everything that's going on in the world politics right now, the world stage, if there's a World War III that pops off and I get drafted for some reason, I don't know, like I'm turning 40 and I hope that's not a reality, but like I don't think I could kill. I don't want to go down that path. Like I just would refuse. I feel like, right? Like, but then I would be, ostracized by my society and saying that I'm, a traitor or, that's the things that I struggle with. It's
yeah.
like, what if that's a reality and people have to make that decision of, of being a soldier or whatever and having to take a life. And if I don't align with that, like what would happen? You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it's just such a crazy thought, like to even be presented with that opportunity and then what you would do. Like what I hope that I am strong enough to stand and take a stand for what I believe in. You know what I mean? But there's also that human side of us that there's a ton of psychological studies about people going with the flow and doing,
Absolutely.
going along with the masses just to fit in because of the fear of being ostracized and you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do.
So,
But I think this is where faith comes into play. And I don't mean airy-fairy stuff, but I think the acknowledgement that you will know. You will know what you need to do at any given time. You know, it's not, and you won't be the first and you won't be the last, you know.
Sure.
Somebody once said to me, and this is a complete aside, some woman who read for me, and this was before the books, or maybe when the books first started. She said, you know, part of the reason you can do this work is you've already been through so much public humiliation that you don't care. And I thought, well, I still do care, but there's truth to that. You know, there's a little bit of truth to, I can't care what people think about this because it's just what I'm here to do anyway. And then you move past that and it stops becoming the challenge that it might have been, you know, and the same would be true, I suspect, for being a conscientious objector, if that's what's in your heart, you know.
Sure.
I don't know what I would do in a circumstance when my home was being threatened. I don't know. You know, I don't know, truthfully. And hopefully I won't have to, but I may, as anybody may. We don't know.
Sure. Wow, Paul, my friend, brother, this is always a fun time hanging out with you, man.
I always enjoy it too. Thank you.